Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse study of the entire Bible. Currently we are in Second Chronicles chapter 34, and this is part 2. Last time I um, did just kind of little background leading up to this. We're going to study Josiah. And one of the things that I said about Josiah, he was prophesied way back during the time of Jeroboam, and then the reign of Rehoboam, Solomon's son, right when the nation of Israel split because of the foolishness of Rehoboam, Solomon's son. But Jeroboam turned out to be very wicked. In fact, he was so wicked, he set the wicked bar high. And he was one of the most wicked people. They referred to the sins of Jeroboam. And a prophet came to him, excuse me, to prophesy against his wickedness and pronounce judgment on him. And then one of the prophecies was that he said a son would be born to the kings of Judah. And then it names Josiah by name. And this was some 300 years before Josiah is born. So this is kind of amazing. Now, I also said we're just about 25 years away from the fall of Jerusalem, which was, again, God had begun to prophesy. We see more of that during the writings of the prophet. So when you go through that section of the Bible, the writings of the prophet, and you begin with Isaiah, well, Isaiah from this timeline, remember, is during the time of Hezekiah. So about 80 years to 100 years before God's prophetic word, excuse me, God's prophetic word, he began to warn Israel to turn from their sins, which they didn't. We come to Josiah's grandfather, Manasseh. He seals the doom, the fate of Israel. What probably one of the worst cases of wickedness. In other words, combine all of everybody's wicked sins. Manasseh sought so hard to, again, just for whatever reason, he fought to undo all of the goodness his father Hezekiah had performed. Remember, he grew up around Hezekiah. He saw the righteousness, he saw the faithfulness of God, and then he turned. All right, so Josiah, verse 30, chapter 34, verse 1 says, Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. He did what was right in the Lord's sight and walked in the way of his ancestor David. He did not turn aside from the right or the left. In the 8th year of his reign, while he was still a youth, now this would mean he was around 16 to 17 years old, Josiah began to seek the God of his ancestor David. And in the 12th year he began to cleanse Judah and Jerusalem from the high places, the Asherah poles, the carved images, and the cast images. Then in his presence the altars of Baal were torn down, and he chopped down the incense altars that were above them. He shattered the Asherah's pole, the carved image, the cast image, crushed them to dust, and scattered them over the graves of those who had sacrificed to them. He burned the bones of the priests on the altar. So he cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. He did the same in the cities of Manasseh, Ephraim, and Simeon, and as far as Naphtali, and on their surrounding mountain shrines. He tore down the altars, and he smashed the Asherah's pole and the carved images to powder. He chopped down all of the incense altars throughout the land of Israel, and then returned to Jerusalem. He just kind of did a circuit. So again, the last time we saw this, remember, was Hezekiah. Hezekiah had so turned his heart towards the Lord. And kind of one of the most kind of signs about this is when you see that the high places were destroyed. Now, we had seen back and forth where good kings would do some reforms, but they would leave the high places. But he destroyed all of the pagan shrines. Again, what is amazing, because remember, when you think about Hezekiah, and then even after Manasseh, remember, after Manasseh, great wickedness, God judged him. Manasseh repented, and God had mercy on him, right? And he then turned and then cleaned up Judah for the most part, not wholeheartedly. And I say that because look at how quickly they turned from the Lord. In other words, this is a lot of work he did right here to cleanse Judah. He turned so hard against the pagan worship. It is amazing that he had to do this much work. So the sin, see, it just hadn't changed here. And then after Josiah, by the way, they're going to go right back to doing the same sin. All right, verse 8 says, in the 18th year of his reign, in order to cleanse the land of the temple, Josiah sent Shaphan and Azaliah along with Maaseiah, the governor of the city, to the court historian Joah, the son of Jehoahaz, to repair the temple of the Lord his God. So again, the temple had already fallen in repair. Hezekiah built it up. It is already now in great repair. One of the reasons, because remember, one of the things Manasseh did, and then also Ammon his son. So they just wouldn't turn to paganism. They would bring these things into the temple of God. And so one of the most profane ways, most blasphemous ways, insulting ways is to say, let's go into the temple of God. Be like your spouse committing adultery, but bringing their adultery into your own bedroom. That just adds the injury to insult, as it were. Verse 9, so they went to Hilkiah, the high priest, and gave him the money brought into God's temple. The Levites and the doorkeepers had collected money from Manasseh, Ephraim, and from the entire remnant of Israel, and from all Judah, Benjamin, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. They put it into the hands of those doing the work, those who oversaw the Lord's temple. They gave it to the workmen who were working in the Lord's temple to repair and restore the temple. They gave it to the carpenters, to the builders, and also used it to buy quarry stone and timbers for joining and making beams for the buildings that Judah's king had destroyed. The men were doing the work with integrity. Their overseers were Johath and Obadiah, Levites from Merites and Zechariah and Meshullam from the Kohathites as supervisors. The Levites were also skilled with musical instruments, and they were also over the that were supervising all the work, supervising all those doing the work, task by task. Some of the Levites were secretaries, officers, and gatekeepers. When they brought out the money that had been deposited in the Lord's temple, Hilkiah, the priest, found the book of the law of the Lord written by the hand of Moses. Now, this book probably was the book of Deuteronomy. The kings were instructed to kind of keep a copy of it. that they were to constantly read from it to keep them on the path. So probably it wasn't the 5 books, but probably the book of Deuteronomy. Verse 15. Consequently, Hilkiah told Shaphan, the court secretary, I have found the book of the law in the Lord's temple. And he gave the book to Shaphan. Shaphan took the book to the king, and also reported, excuse me, your servants are doing all that was placed in their hands. They have emptied out the money that was found in the Lord's temple, and have put it into the hand of the overseers, in the hand of those doing the work. Then Shaphan, the court secretary, told the king, Hilkiah, the priest, gave me a book, and Shaphan read from it in the presence of the king. And when the king heard the words of the law, he tore his clothes. Then he commanded Hilkiah, Ahikam, son of Shaphan, Abdon, son of Micah, Shaphan, the court secretary, and the king's servant, Asaiah. Now again, forgive these mispronunciation of these Hebrew names. Go ask Yahweh for me and for those remaining in Israel and Judah concerning the word of the book that was found. For great is the Lord's wrath that is poured out on us, because our fathers have not kept the word of the Lord in order to do everything written in this book. Now I want you to keep this in mind. Now notice what he said. Go ask Yahweh. Now, one of the primary ways that God would answer the king like this, God could have chosen to appear to the king himself, visions, dreams, or whatever. God could have chosen to send an angel, okay? But one of the primary ways, of course, was the prophet. God would raise up a prophet. God would reveal himself to the prophet. And that prophet's word was gold, okay? The prophet's word was gold. And so I'm leading up to something here, excuse me, because in order for this to have happened, now I'll come back to, I want you to keep this in mind. He's asking Yahweh. How does Yahweh answer? Through a prophet or through some other supernatural revelation. Primarily, though, a prophet. All right, so verse 22, so Hilkiah and those that the king had designated went to the prophetess Huldah, the wife of Shallum, son of Toka, the son of Hashra, keeper of the wardrobe. She lived in Jerusalem in the 2nd district. They spoke with her about this. Now, the reason why I want to bring this out is because notice it was a woman that they went to. And I'm just going to dip my kind of toe in the water here, not deep, and just kind of throw something out, because there is big controversy and debate about the question, can a woman preach? Can a woman teach? Can a woman lead? Can a woman, do anything in the church today? And there are some New Testament verses that people use in Timothy, more like when Timothy, where Paul says, I, command that a woman does not teach. And I'm not going to get into the whole subject of women preachers. Just to say, this was a woman prophet in every sense of the word. With every authority, she spoke the word, of the Lord. Of course, other women have lead also, like Deborah. Now, let's also acknowledge that women leaders were the exception to the rule. And I'm not even go so far to say there were exceptions, but we're not going to get into why. But understand that this is a woman right here that is giving a word of prophecy. All right. Verse 23, she said to them, this is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. Say to the man who sent you to me, this is what Yahweh says. I'm about to bring disaster on this place and on its inhabitants, fulfilling all of the curses written in the book that they read in the presence of the king of Judah, because they have abandoned me and have burned incense to other gods in order to provoke me with all the works of their hands. My wrath will be poured out on this place, and it will not be quenched. Now again, Manasseh did that. Say to the king of Judah who sent you to ask Yahweh, this is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. As for the words that you heard, because your heart was tender, and you humbled yourself before God, when you heard the words against this palace, against this place and against its inhabitants, and because you humbled yourself before me, and you tore your clothes and wept before me, I myself have heard, and this is what the Lord's declaration. Now, understand that phrase again, and I think it should always sink in, because there is a lot of mischaracterization and misinformation about God, the God of the Old Testament. Is he the God of wrath? He just pronounced wrath, right? However, why is he pouring out wrath? Because people continue to rebel. People continue to sin against him. And by the way, when we're talking about sin, we're talking about just throwing their fists up. In other words, they're just saying, okay, we acknowledge you, God, we just reject you. Okay? But when a person humbles himself, there's always mercy. There's not one time when a person has humbled themselves before God and God has said, "Nah, I'm not going to have mercy on you. No, I'm not going to have mercy on you." There's not one time in the Old Testament, God, or New Testament, where somebody came to God, asked for mercy, asked forgiveness, and God said, "No, I'm not going to do it. No. You're gonna burn." I want you to understand that. There are two examples that I'm going to rattle off. Saul and Judas. Think about their not repentance, but sorrow over their life. But they didn't repent to God. Okay, so keep that in mind. So God, my point is, God always hears the cry of the humble. And God is extremely merciful. God is more merciful than he is wrath. Verse 28, I will indeed gather you to your father, then you will be gathered to your grave in peace. Okay, now that's an interesting phrase there, because Joshua, the context of peace, I think should be defined here, especially when we read how Joshua will die. I'll come back to that later, but understand that he's not talking about God's wrath. So the peace has to be in context to God's wrath, excuse me, or God's judgment. Okay, God's judgment here. In other words, God is not going to judge him. He says, your eyes will not see all the disaster that I am bringing on this place and on the inhabitants. Then they reported to the king. Now keep this in mind, this is just only like some 25 years from this point here. So that's the peace that he's referring to, that he won't see that. So the king sent messengers and gathered all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. And the king went up to the Lord's temple with all of the men of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, as well as the priests and the Levites, all the people from great to small. He read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant that had been found in the Lord's temple. Then the king stood at the post and made a covenant in the Lord's presence to follow the Lord and to keep his commands, his decrees, and his statutes with all his heart and with all his soul, in order to carry out the words of the covenant written in the book. Let me make one. All right, let me see here. Let me make one correction that while I'm thinking about it. I keep saying the fall of Jerusalem is 23 years. It's 23 years from the death of 25 years from the death of Josiah. Okay, probably more like 40 to 50 years during his life time that the judgment and wrath is going to come. Verse 32. He had all those present in Jerusalem and Benjamin agreed to it. So all the inhabitants of Jerusalem carried out the covenant of God, the God of their ancestors. So Josiah removed everything that was detestable from all the land belonging to the Israelites, and he required all who were present in Israel to serve the Lord their God throughout his reign, and they did not turn aside from following Yahweh, the God of their ancestors. I want to see one thing here, that leadership is good, but here's one of the problems. Notice he said he commanded them to do that. The problem with that was they followed the king. They were good as long as the king was good. But remember, as we have seen, as soon as the king turns wicked, so they turn wicked themselves. Okay? All right, we're going to pick it up in chapter 35 in the next study. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section. All comments are welcome. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. See you in the next study.